In this video, we're going over the Overwatch Season 6 DPS tier list, because there was a ton of buffs and nerfs that completely changed the meta, so we're going to break it all down so you know exactly what characters you should play and what characters you might want to avoid. But if you enjoy the content, do me a solid and smash that subscribe button. But it looks like less than 25% of you are subscribed, so what are you waiting for? Press that subscribe button. It's a nice way to support the channel, and let's jump into it. The first character that we got to talk about is Sombra. And while Sombra is still a really good choice, super solid around dive, there's a couple of things that you have to consider about Sombra going into Season 6. Number one, Sombra did get an ultimate nerf, which when that is one of the most powerful things about her kit, having consistent ultimates, having an ultimate that you're going to have less often is definitely going to hurt her impact. And in addition to that, full dives based on Winston and coordinated dives are something that are not as common in ranked play, especially the lower and lower in rank you go. Oftentimes you have to have a very specific tank that is going to play dive and commit to it, and the synergy and the coordination to actually do dives well, it's not something you're always going to run into. I do think that you can still play Sombra in any composition if you're good with her, but she isn't as strong as she was before, and I definitely think for ranked play, she does get a bit marks off compared to like her pro pick rate or something like that. For these reasons, I'm going to put her in the B tier. I think she can be a solid pick, but she's not quite as strong as some of the other options just in ranked. Now, the next character that we got to talk about is Ashe. And Ashe is just really strong this season. And there's several reasons that Ashe has been better and better in Overwatch 2. She, one, can contest characters like Tracer with threatening a one-shot headshot. She has consistent damage. Her ultimate is one of the best DPS ultimates, period, if you use it correctly. Just being able to just eradicate squishy teams and really put a lot of pressure on a team in a 5v5 environment. Bob is amazing, and I do think that the only weakness to Ashe really is her uptime, and if you learn how to properly manage your uptime, which we have a lot of Ashe guys for you can go check out, Ashe is just a fantastic character to play, and you don't need to even play her with the pocket. On top of that, when we're talking about ranked, there are Pharahs and Echoes flying around that are difficult to deal with, and Ashe just gives you just a hedge against a lot of that. When you're walking at a spawn, when you go into that first fight, losing that first fight can actually create a lot of game losses just based off momentum alone, just having to swap and counterpick and be at an ultimate disadvantage. All in all, though, I think Ashe is just really good and definitely a character worth learning. I'm putting her in the S tier. She might not be the top of the S tier, but she's definitely very, very strong and a character I would suggest. Now, the next character that I have for you is Hanzo. Hanzo is still really strong with his one-shot capability. And there's a lot of things that Hanzo can still do, like threaten long angles, threaten off angles, and win a lot of 1v1s that he always has done and he still can do. But that change to his wall climb is going to weaken a lot of his interactions with some dueling and playing high ground map. Like on certain maps like Watchpoint Gibraltar and New Bonnie, Hanzo gets to knock an arrow, wall climb, and then get off a shot that can insta-kill someone as he gets to the top of the climb. He no longer can do that, and there's even interactions where you're trying to fight someone and like a diver is chasing you and you knock an arrow, wall climb, try to lunge backwards and shoot them. There's a lot of interactions like that that just don't work the same as they have before, and I do think that it all kind of comes together and makes Hanzo feel a lot weaker, especially in ranked, especially when you need to be winning a lot of these duels, you need to be able to do a lot of these plays. He's still strong. I'm not going to say he's weak, but he isn't as consistent and reliable for the things that you wanted him to do as he was before. And as someone that has been grinding Hanzo a lot on my ult, I did grind Hanzo to Grandmaster 1, and he was probably my best DPS. I feel like this change just severely handicaps the type of plays I could do. And I think it really makes me not even really want to grind Hanzo. Overall, I think he's just okay right now. I'm going to put him at the top of the B tier. He could be low A, but just for most ranks in general, I think he's a B tier pick. The next character that we got to talk about is Sim. And Sim has lost a lot of power. And I've talked to a couple Sim mains, and they've said that overall the changes have nerfed the character quite a bit. And especially when we think about lower ranks where Sim was super, super strong and she got a lot of free value, she just doesn't get that much free value anymore. And now in the hands of someone really good with Sim, you can definitely make her work. And I do think that strategically, especially if you're like duoing or trioing, you can do some cool things with her, but she's definitely not as free of a pick as she was before. I don't necessarily think that she fits naturally into a lot of compositions, and I think this is the weakest season, or one of the weaker seasons for her, especially with a lot of flyers. I'm going to put her in the C tier. I think that this could easily change over time, and Sim definitely is a weird anomaly in the meta because she plays so differently than all the DPS, but I do think that she's a C tier pick right now. Next up, we do got to talk about Torb, and Torb actually feels a bit stronger than he was before. Now, a lot of people would still rather have his turret, and I think that that just made him stronger in most ranks, just having that turret, but he still has a turret that can be a detriment to a lot of divers, and in addition to that, he's pretty powerful in the neutral. He's pretty powerful with duels, and all in all, this character is just massively underplayed for the amount of power he brings. He's a very consistent character. He's a very strong character. He can be a character that you play in a lot of compositions, and in ranked, he can really put a stranglehold on many of the divers that are just kind of rolling through you. Like, you don't really care about Hammond that much. You don't really care about Tracer that much. There's characters like Echo that you just put incremental pressure into. Like, a lot of things you just have good matchups against, where other characters would just struggle really, really hard. Torb just doesn't care, exists, attritions, and wins. And I do think that because of all that, I'm putting him in the A tier. He's that good right now. Now, the next character that we have for you is Tracer. And even though I don't think that Tracer is as easy to get value out of as a lot of other characters in most ranks, she's a hard character to grasp. She's a hard character to pick up and to learn. I don't think that it makes sense to put her anywhere else besides the S tier, because a lot of what is played and what is meta is based off of Tracer's power level. She's consistently the strongest thing in pro play, the strongest thing in high ranked play, and as people get better and better at the character, she warps metas around her. She has insanely high uptime. She can do so many different things, whether it's pressuring people, creating pressure, killing people solo, hitting pulse bombs. There's just so much that is possible from this character. And yes, you could probably get value with a lot of other characters if you do not have the skill set to utilize what Tracer can do. That doesn't mean that once you get good enough at Tracer, you couldn't actually just make up all the difference. And I do think that you got to recognize that Tracer is something that warps every pro meta, and oftentimes because of her difficulty to play, it allows for a lot of DPS to be viable. And you'll see what I'm talking about, where in this list, most DPS, even the C tier, all of these DPS are playable and they're fine in the majority of ranks, because it's not until the upper tiers of skill that Tracer just becomes an objectively better pick than a lot of other characters because of how hard she is to play. So this is important for you to understand. It tells you that Tracer is the strongest, but it also allows for so many other things to be viable in most ranks. Now, the next character that we got to talk about is Soldier. Soldier did receive quite a few nerfs, and he is a bit weaker than he was before. And honestly, I think I overrated him in my previous tier list, talking about how strong Soldier was. He was very, very strong when he did get buffed, but he wasn't just objectively better than some of the other picks, especially these B tier picks like Hanzo and Sombra. I think attack the meta at a different axis that oftentimes in the hands of someone that's really skilled, I think that they could be better than Soldier. Soldier is flexible though. He can be played in a lot of different compositions, and he's always going to bring a consistent amount of value, and I think that that can't be understated. This character is just really solid. He fights in a way that really works to how you want to play a DPS, you know, controlling an off angle. If you run, let's say you're trying to control an off angle because you want to apply pressure from the off angle, you go there and you run into a cast. As long as you keep your distance, you use your heal station, you can typically force that cast to run away, and then you get to control the off angle. And Soldier's really good at doing that. So for ranked, when things are more simplified, there's less teamwork and cohesion, Soldier's amazing. I do think that he kind of teeters off, unlike Tracer, who only really becomes activated as people get to a certain level of skill. Soldier teeters down and becomes weaker and weaker as you get higher and higher in rank. I do think that he's still really good, and I would say he's in the B tier. I would say he's probably, you know, still like lower B. I'm gonna put him, yeah, he's just generally in the B tier, not above or below anyone. But he would be higher, A tier, top of A tier, depending on what rank you're in. So this is just something to keep in mind. Next off, we do got to talk about Junkrat, and Junkrat is just in a pretty bad state. I'm not going to say that he's not powerful. I will say that his ultimate is still one of the best ultimates in the DPS whole catalog, and he provides value in a way that a lot of other DPS cannot. But I will say that he's pretty map specific, so that lack of flexibility is something that is going to hurt him. And he's also way, way better on most points on the defense side. You typically need a choke, and you would much rather be on defense to get the value out of him. Now, of course, you can grind this character like crazy and become cracked at him and make him work in any situation, but that's such a small percentage. It's few and far between, and you have to kind of like commit to the dark road, commit to the Junkrat road. You can do it on any character, but I do want you to understand that if we're talking about a meta, if we're talking about what is just objectively the easiest way to get value and even the best thing when you master it, Junkrat doesn't hold a candle to a lot of what's played. I think he's fine as like a flex pick, but I wouldn't suggest you just 100% one trick him unless that's just what you want to do, unless that's just who you are, and that's perfectly fine. But I'm gonna put him in the bottom of C tier. I think he's still fine, he's still playable, but he's not as strong as he was. Especially, he's kind of been hurting ever since they really hurt the consistency of his mines, his combo. He has been hurting quite a bit. Although he might have been a little bit too strong back then, I definitely think that they kind of overstepped it and made him a bit too weak. Now we do got to talk about Pharah. And Pharah's a tricky one for me to place, because if I said Pharah with a Mercy, right? Pharah and Mercy together, it's like S tier. At least top of A, S, right? If Pharah with Mercy is so powerful, so many tanks can't do anything about you. You have to have a good hit scan that is going to do something about you, and that hit scan has to have assistance. And even if they do everything right, if you're good enough on Pharah, you can outplay all of this. Play Skybox, look for opportunities to dive bomb in, and just out attrition the enemy team. There's so much you can do to just hard carry on this character. I mean, think about all the times that you've lost to a Pharah Mercy and you just felt like you couldn't do anything about it. This character is that strong, but that's only with the Mercy. So I think that I would put her all the way in the S tier if it was guaranteed. And then without it, I think it's like not really that good. And it, of course, the character is not the easiest to play. Super powerful though. I think I gotta put her in the A tier. I think just because of how much she's seeing play right now, and just it's really easy to just get together with the Mercy duo and just like lock in all the time, play together, and you're just gonna roll so many lobbies if you get good at Pharah. Like, just grind her, practice your distancing, practice your conservation of your flight and your fuel, and you're just gonna be perfectly fine. And you're gonna be able to win against a lot of lobbies. People are gonna be swapping like double hit scan diva against you. And if you have Pharah as a character that you can play and play well, and then if that doesn't work, you swap to something else, you're just gonna win just such a range of games that it's crazy. Now we do gotta talk about Bastion. And Bastion got a crazy amount of buffs. The armor buff makes him tankier, and just buffs to everything. I mean, he got so many buffs. And this one is going to be controversial because I think a lot of people are going to want me to put him pretty high up because he got all these crazy buffs. But the reason that he's low is not because he is weak. He's good at his job. He's like the best tool for the job that he has, right? But that's not every job. Like, he's good against Winstons that just int into you. He's good against Zaryas that play out of position. He's good against Ramatras that play out of position. But there are a lot of characters that can just like ignore him, kite him, play from distance, play outside of what he can do, whether it's a Mei, whether it's like a Hanzo, whether even it's an Ashe playing the high ground in an off angle. There's a lot of tanks that don't really care about him that much. I think Orisa's pretty good against him. Diva's pretty good against him. Doom's pretty good against him. Sigma's pretty good against him. These are tanks that just like kind of don't care. Echoes don't really care. And a lot of people are going to make mistakes into you. And if you're in a lower rank, I think he can be perfectly fine. But you got to consider that he's good against very specific things, but way less flexible than Soldier. So I would say, you know, so if Soldier has 100% of range where you could play Soldier in like every comp and every situation and still be okay, Bastion's probably like 10 or 20%. But in that 10 or 20%, he's a slam dunk 10 out of 10 pick, and he's super strong. You just can't play him. Like, you can't play him into a dive. Like, no, you can't do that. You can't play him on a long distance sniper map. You know, you're just gonna get outranged by everything. And there's a lot of characters that people play a lot like Ana that just completely shut you down. So while he does have power and he's really good, he's just not that flexible. I think he's still good C tier. I think that in the situations that he's good in, he's like A tier, but it's just not going to be every situation, and it's going to be few and far between. I still think that he can be someone that you play quite a bit, but I don't imagine that you're going to get completely dominated by this character. But don't worry, if you do feel like you're getting dominated by Bastions in your ranked games, let me know, and I'll make an anti-Bastion guide, and you'll never lose to a Bastion again, I promise you. So yeah, just let me know if you want that in the comments down below. And the next character that we got to talk about is Cassidy, who did get some nerfs, including nerfs to his weapon, but he did get a buff back to 225. It makes him better against dive, but it does make him a bit niche in his playstyle. He's no longer able to fight from long distance. He's going to be weaker than a lot of other hit scans on the longer sight lines, longer distance maps. And I think that his best maps are going to be a lot of the closer range sightline push maps where he can really get into some scrappy fights, contesting flyers as well. He doesn't really have a great identity. I think he's kind of like an anti-diver, but even with the increase in health, I think he's still pretty easy to dive, especially if he's solo. He's just not really that good right now. I think he's okay. I like the health, but with a character that was already really weak and underperforming, they gave him a buff, but they gave him a big nerf as well. If they just gave him a straight up health buff, I think he would be pretty good. But to compensate when he was already so much weaker than a lot of the other competitive options, I think he's just, you know, he's like a B tier. He's fine. I think you could play him in some compositions depending on your tank. He's probably pretty good with like an Orisa tank, pretty good with a Ramatra. He's okay probably with a Rhine. But outside of that, I probably wouldn't want to play him with a lot of other tanks. Next up, I do got to talk about Sojourn, and Sojourn is about the same placement as Ashe in flexibility. They both have great mobility. They have long distance poke. They have burst damage, and they have pretty good ultimates. I think all in all, these characters are just really, really good. And I would suggest either Sojourn or Ashe or both. I think they're both good with pockets. I think they're both good without pockets. I just think that they can be played in a lot of different compositions. They both have the means to fight against dive. They could even both be played with dive. They can both be played in poke. They can both be played in brawl. Like, they're flexible, they're strong, they give you a lot of room to get value even when you're starting out with them. But also, as you increase in skill, get more crits, better with the rail, better with the headshot on Ashe, you're gonna get more value. And I'm gonna put them in the S tier as well. I think these three are really, really good DPS, and I'd highly suggest playing any of these three. I do think that Ashe and Sojourn are gonna be a lot easier to get value out of than Tracer is if you're new or if you're lower in rank. I think that Ashe is the easiest character to get value out of the three, so she's the one that's gonna kind of scale easier. So if you're, you know, maybe in gold or below, I'd probably suggest Ashe the most, because you can get better and the character's still good as you get better in skill. But all these characters are still perfectly reasonable to play and learn, and you're going to see them a lot this meta. Now, the next character that we got to talk about is Mei, and I think that Mei is fairly strong. She does have some problems where you can't really play her into a dive or with the dive, but she plays really well against a lot of the tanks in the game, and especially for ranked, you can just force a lot of just mistakes by the enemy team. Your wall can bait out huge amounts of cooldowns, isolate engagements, or just completely cut off an enemy tank. I think that she's really survivable, so there's a lot of characters you're just not going to have to deal with when you play her. You don't care about characters like Genji. You care less about Tracers. You don't really care about Hammonds. And there's a lot about her that's nice. And there's a lot of tanks that are really feeding and going way too in and just kind of getting away with it, like Orisa, where you can heavily punish them with your wall. All in all, I think Mei's a really good pick. I'm going to put her in the A tier. Keep in mind that objectively, like from the top-down meta, the pro meta, I would say that Sombra is a lot more powerful. But for ranked, I think that Mei is easier to get value out of in the majority of ranks, even all the way up to some of the higher ranks of play. So I'm putting her in the A tier. I think she's really, really strong. But yeah, the lines between A and B is not really that far. They're kind of all in like a glob of characters that are all good. Keep in mind that the distance between the top and the bottom is not really that high. It's not really that far, depending on, you know, the average rank. All these characters can get value in their own ways. I don't think there's any DPS that's objectively super weak. The next character that we got to talk about is Echo. I've said consistently that Echo is just really underplayed, really strong. You don't need a pocket with her. She provides a ton of value. She has a great ultimate. You can poke from an off angle and then run away to build ult and apply pressure. You can poke from an off angle and dive in. You can play with a dive. You can play with a brawl. There's just a lot you can do with this character that's really strong. She is hard to learn. She plays way differently than most other characters. She's not easy to learn. You need good tracking. You need just really, really good intuition about how to go in and how to utilize your abilities correctly so that you still have something to get out, or when you can go all in and be okay. There's a lot to this character, but I do think that she's really strong. Super, super underplayed, like I said, and I'm going to put her at the top of A tier. Just a really, really great character that I think more people should be playing, and yeah, I think it's deserving of the top of the A tier, but not the easiest character to learn. More people should be grinding this character, and if you become someone that's like an Echo specialist and you get really good at Echo, I can't imagine that you would have a hard time climbing. Next up, we do got to talk about Widowmaker, where Widow still is struggling after those pretty big nerfs to her range. It's still possible to play Widow and get some good value on her. On the long distance maps, while she can't consistently one-shot, and I do think that Hanzo's a bit better, she still threatens, you know, a lot of squishy. She can still take off angles that are close enough to get those one shots. And a lot of times you're going to be able to just hit people that are low enough to kill them. I do think that she's also just a character that if you're really, really good with her, you can just stomp on people. And she plays outside of the range of a lot of other characters. While she's not as consistent as a character like Ashe, I think that she's still powerful. And overall, I'm going to put her kind of about the same as probably Cassidy. I think that she's fine. She could be a little bit below or above Cassidy. Doesn't really matter. She's a B tier character. I think that she is still pretty good and a bit underrated if you're good enough with the character. But yeah, she's not as strong as she used to be, where I put her always like top of AS. Next up, we do got to talk about Reaper. And I've said this for quite a while. I do think that Reaper is quite weak. He's okay in rank depending on the tank matchup you're up against. You can play him against characters like Junkrat Queen, characters like Ramatra. He's really, really good against Ramatra. He's okay against some of the other tanks as well. I think he can get some value here and there. I'm actually going to put him at the here. I think Bastion's quite a bit better than these three, but they're all perfectly reasonable in the right situations, in the right hands. But yeah, I do think that he's been needing a buff for a while, unfortunately. You can definitely get value out of him, and I love Reaper myself, but he's not the easiest character to get value out of, depending on the composition you're playing and who you're up against. Next up, let's talk about Genji. And I think that Genji is a bit strange because he's okay. Like, he does work when you have someone to engage with you. If you have a diver, a Winston, a Ball, a Doomfist, a Diva, it's fine. You can play him. He's really bad when you have anti-synergy in your team. Like, if you don't have the supports to help you, if you have, like, Moira or Bap, it's really awkward to play Genji. If you have, like, Sigma, super, super awkward. But if you have a diver to go with you, just a little bit. You just need a little bit of help oftentimes with Genji. It's hard to do it all by yourself. But if you have someone, maybe if your Moira is like a DPS Moira and just going in, it can work. If you just have someone that will help you a little bit, because Genji has that momentum factor where, you know, oftentimes you go on by yourself. There's a really, really tiny margin for error, right? But it becomes so much easier the more people that are helping you. I do think that Genji is still fine, and you can definitely pop off and hard carry by yourself if you're good enough with him. I'm going to put him in the B tier. I think he's a B tier pick. I think he's perfectly fine. I kind of want to put like these two up towards the A tier. I don't really think it matters too much, but these two are definitely a cut above these four for sure. Yeah, I'm going to just put him kind of right here. Anyways, this is where I would place every single character. I do think that a lot of characters are viable right now. Like I said, even the weakest character on the list. I put Junkrat as the weakest character on the list. I think he's perfectly reasonable. And he's probably, you know, in gold, he's probably way better than Tracer for most players. Even in plat, he's probably way better than Tracer for most players. That's just how close this list is. Like, this is not a wide gap. It's like really, really marginal, the difference in value that you get from the top to the bottom. And you can easily overcome that margin with expertise and skill at your character. So I just want to I want you to keep that in mind. This is probably one of the most balanced DPS, you know, metas that we've seen. It's really, really balanced for most ranks. And maybe at the highest ranks of play, you could argue that it's not balanced because Tracer's so good, but for most ranks, it is balanced. And yeah, it's just something that you should take away. Play whoever you want. Think about how your character synergizes with other characters and other tanks in your roster, what your matchups are against the enemy DPS, enemy tanks, and enemy supports, and have a couple of characters that you really grind. You know, you're confident in your ability to give value every single game, and you will be just fine this season. But if you have any questions, definitely let me know. And only 25% of you are subscribed, so what are you waiting for? Smash that subscribe button in the comments down below. Thank you so much, and I'll see y'all next time.